the right one. Okay, is that can you see my talk as a full screen or is that
Looks great.
okay, great. Well, um thanks for inviting me, Tim. It's great to see you again and greetings, Milwaukee from Green Bay. I have a great respect for the Urban Ecology Center. I think that cities are really important ecosystems, right? And it's really important that we think of them as ecosystems. And so, thanks for your participation and thanks for the work that you all are doing. So, thanks for being here today. So, yeah, obviously, this is my absolute favorite thing to talk about. You know, it's kind of on my mind a lot. It's a big part of my life, studying spiders. And the basic message is on this first slide. A lot of times people think of spiders as eight-legged freaks, you know, and especially around Halloween, they're like these tiny little monsters. But that's not the way I think of them. I think of them as tiny, tool-using tigers. And really think about if they were the size of a tiger, they would be like everybody's favorite animal and they'd be in zoos. But because they're small, they're overlooked and they're kind of oftentimes underappreciated. And so I want to talk a little bit about spiders today and very importantly, answer questions that you might have about spiders, maybe things that you've always wondered about. Not that I have all the answers, we don't know everything, um, but anyway, before I go to this next slide, I want to make sure that you see my email there, draneym@uwgb.edu. And you can also just Google Draney and you'll probably find me because it's a pretty rare name. But I'm really happy to talk to you about spiders or any kind of arthropod, any kind of insect. If you have problems or you're just curious, you can send me photos. It's part of what I do, and I'm really happy to talk to people about that. So let me go to the next slide. Hopefully this is going to work. Oops, I'm having a hard time forwarding it. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So here's the objectives. Mostly I just want to sort of show you why I'm so interested in spiders and why I find them so fascinating, talk a little bit about them, but I also want to answer questions you have. And I think Tim invited me because it's, Halloween season and I get a lot of that. Spiders are kind of part of the Halloween mystique and that's cool. But I think a lot of times people have kind of learned to hate and fear them. And I think that's the wrong approach. And really, especially if you're in a place like Wisconsin, there's just no spiders. Essentially, there's no spiders that can hurt you. Even when you go down to the tropics, spiders are just nothing to really worry about. I've been going down to the tropics for 10 or 12 months of my life. I've been down in Central America collecting spiders. Never been bitten. None of my colleagues or students have ever been bitten. It's just not really something to worry about. So they're not really very spooky, and I spend a lot of time telling people that. So here's the little outline. Talk a little bit about what spiders are, which this might be total review for all of you, but it's kind of fun to think about spiders as animals and where they belong in the tree of life. Talk a little bit about the morphology or the kind of parts and shapes of spiders and how they're put together as animals. And then, of course, I want to talk a little bit about their life cycle. And there's sort of two superpowers that spiders have, and it's silk and venom. There's some other interesting things about spiders, of course, but if you want to understand spiders, you really need to understand silk and what they do with silk. And so I'll spend some time on that. I'm going to skip some of the stuff about ecological significance, but if you have questions about that sort of thing, I'm happy to talk about that stuff. So hopefully there'll be time for Q&A. So let's talk about first just sort of what spiders are. Of course, everyone knows what a spider is. Every first grader has experience with them. This is the cross spider, which is an introduced spider. It's from Europe and Asia that's become very common in eastern Wisconsin. And it loves to spin webs between widely separated trees. And so it loves our backyards. It loves our city parks. And so it's a big part of Milwaukee and Green Bay. And it's a pretty recent arrival. It's arrived here probably this century, but certainly like say the 1990s. Anyway, on the right of the screen there is a kind of a cartoon of the tree of life. And this is this very profound idea that all organisms are related to each other because we all descended from the last universal common ancestor, some single-celled microbe billions of years ago. Essentially, its descendants have given rise to the three domains of life. All the plants and animals and fungi and microbes that are on our planet today are all descended from this one organism. And so we have a tree of life that's just like your family tree that literally connects all species together. And it's a really profound idea. And it's a place where I want to start when I talk about spiders, is where are spiders on the tree of life? Now, obviously, spiders are in this part of the tree of life that includes frogs and butterflies. This is the bushiest branch of the tree of life. And what that means is there's more species, more different gene pools of animals than any other kind of organism. There's more genetic diversity among bacteria, but there's more species of animals than any other kind of organism. So that's where we'll start. So spiders are just like us, just like plants and most microbes you're familiar with. They're eukaryotes. They have bigger cells, and they're very complicated cells, and they have what we call membrane-bound organelles. They have little machines inside of their cells. And importantly, they have a nucleus, right? This is the nucleus that has the DNA that is all the instructions for the organism. So us, plants, animals, fungi are all in the eukaryotes, and that includes spiders. Animals and fungi are in a group called the opisthokonts. So, and there's some microbes too, but so this is sort of an interesting idea that fungi are actually more closely related to animals than they are to plants. We kind of think of them as like in the vegetable kingdom, but they're really not. They're really more closely related to animals. And so humans and spiders are in the opisthokonts, which you may have not known that. So congratulations, you're an opisthokonts. Now we're getting into animals. The most animals are in a group called the Eumetazoa. Spiders, pandas, us are all Eumetazoa, which means true multicellular animals. These animals all, eat food and they poop, right? Everybody poops. They move around with muscles. So that's one of the interesting things that animals do, is being able to move around really quickly. They also think, with these modified cells called neurons that make up our nervous system. And spiders and pandas and humans all have these two superpowers, muscles and neurons, that no other organism has. That's what makes animals so interesting, right? Is that they move around and they respond to their environment. They think, solve problems, and spiders do all that stuff. Okay, so down here, this is a smaller box of organisms, the arthropods. This is where we part ways with the spiders. So spiders are arthropods, along with insects, crustaceans, centipedes and millipedes. Those are all arthropods. We're in a different group, right? We're in the chordates, vertebrates. So this is where we part ways with the spiders. Arthropods are animals that have an exoskeleton. Their skeleton is also their skin, and it's on the outside of their body, and then their muscles are inside their bones. And so because of that, this skeleton is non-living. It's kind of like your fingernails, right, or your hair. It can't grow. And so if an arthropod needs to grow, it has to take its skeleton off and molt its exoskeleton. So insects and spiders all have to go through this molting process. And this is the most successful group of animals. And so the most speciose group of organisms on the whole planet. There's something like 1 million different species of arthropods. And as you'll see, there's a lot of species of spiders too, but most of them are insects and mites, actually. So then we come to a group of animals that has spiders, but it doesn't have insects. These are the arthropods called chelicerates. The chelicerata are arthropods that don't have mandibles. They don't have jaws like a honeybee or a human. They have fangs, right? Or some chelicerates, like daddy longlegs, they actually have a pair of pincers, like two pairs of pincers that they use as their mouth parts. So those are called the chelicerae. So fangs, or these pincer-like mouth parts, are called chelicerae. And so all of the arachnids you know about, scorpions, spiders, mites, daddy longlegs, those are all chelicerates. Another chelicerate that lives in the ocean are horseshoe crabs. We call them crabs. They kind of look like crabs, but they're not related to crabs. They're related to spiders and scorpions and so on. So that's where the spiders separate from the insects, the chelicerates. So spiders are chelicerates. Then we get down to the terrestrial chelicerates, this really big group that everybody's familiar with called arachnids. So the important thing here is a lot of times people get confused. They think arachnid, that's the scientific name for spider, right? No, that's not correct. All spiders are arachnids. It's like the family they're in, right? The big group they're in. It's really a class, not a family, but it's the big group they're in. but not all arachnids are spiders, right? So some arachnids are scorpions, some of them are mites, some of them are daddy longlegs, but they share this body part that you can see on this scorpion here. You can't see their chelicerae, but they've got little tiny pincers on their mouth. Behind that, they have a pair of pincers that are called the pedipalps, and we'll see that spiders have pedipalps too. And then they've got 4 pairs of walking legs, and then they've got an abdomen behind that. Now, scorpions have a stinger at the end of their abdomen, and spiders don't. Spiders have spinnerets that they use to make silk, but they have these 2 body parts. The cephalothorax has the head and all the legs, and then the abdomen mostly has guts in it. So the digestive system, the reproductive system, the excretory system, the circulatory system, all of that is mostly located in the abdomen of these animals. So you're really familiar with arachnids. So now we're getting really close to spiders. Spiders are in a group called, and it's kind of a bad name because it's hard to spell and it's hard to pronounce, but it's called Araneae. The Araneae are the group that includes all spiders and only spiders. So when you want to have the scientific name for spiders, you say Araneae. So here we are. The ones we want to talk about, that's a jumping spider there. They're kind of cute, I think, in my opinion. They got big eyes. They are diurnal, right? Daytime, visual animals, just like we are. And so we can kind of relate to these jumping spiders. But anyway, that's one group of spiders. Well, let's talk about spiders. We know with high level of confidence that all spiders are related to each other and they're all in one group. So all spiders are more closely related to each other than they are to any other animal. So we call that a monophyletic group. That is, it's a group where there's one common ancestor that gave rise to all the spiders. And we know that because of some evidence that are called synapomorphies, or shared, unique characters that spiders have. So all spiders have a bunch of characters that no other animals have. And I'm going to talk about 2 of them right now, these 2 synapomorphies that kind of prove that spiders are related to each other. One is the how they make silk. A lot of different animals make silk, right? Silkworms make silk. You may not realize fleas make silk. Lots of different animals make silk, but only spiders make silk with these little finger-like appendages on the end of their abdomen, at the end of their butt, called spinnerets. So these spinnerets are like little finger-like appendages that can move around, and they're attached inside to little ducts that attach to glands inside their abdomen. These glands make silk. It's a liquid material. And then they basically pool this liquid into a thread to make their silken threads that they use for all sorts of things. So that's a really important thing about spiders, is the way they make silk. It's unique. The way that they have sex is also unique. So this is something you need to know about spiders if you want to, say that you know about spiders, is that only spiders mate this way. The males mate with their mouth parts. Okay, so here are the pedipalps of a male spider. They look like little short legs at the front of any spider. But female spiders, their pedipalps just look like little short legs. But male spiders, their pedipalp looks like a fist. It looks like a boxing glove almost. And you can see the little kind of boxing glove shape here. That is a complicated organ that's sort of like a turkey baster, right? Where, you can suck up gravy with this turkey baster and then the gravy goes into the tube. The spider does the same thing. The male spiders, their testes, right, their gonads are in their abdomen. And so they have to squirt the sperm out of their abdomen, usually onto a little silken web called a sperm web. And then they suck this liquid silk up into these turkey basters. And then their palps are what we call charged. We call them palps instead of pedipalps because it's just shorter. So these palps then get put into the female's reproductive system that's in her abdomen. So they literally mate with their mouth parts. And there's no other animal that copulates in this way. It's unique to spiders, and all spiders do this. So that's a very interesting aspect of the biology of spiders. So let's look at this group, the Araneae, the spiders. This is a really successful lineage of animals, right? Really important, ecologically important group of animals. They're some of the most important predators in almost every terrestrial ecosystem. They don't really occur in the ocean. There's some that live on the intertidal, in the mangroves and so on. But for the most part, it's a terrestrial group. But they even live in freshwater and wetland habitats. So they're all over the earth, the dry land of earth. And it's a very ancient lineage, a very successful lineage. So this is kind of the tree of life of the spiders, right? This phylogeny or cladogram that shows how we think spiders are related to each other, more or less. And you can see here at the top of the tree is the scorpions. So they're not spiders, but that's an outgroup. And so everybody down here are all spiders. And up at the top here are the most kind of primitive spiders. That is the ones that look the most like their ancestors. And these are basically tarantulas and their kin. They live in holes, and they're big spiders, and they're hairy and kind of tarantula-like. There's a number of different families of those. And then we have some primitive spiders here, which you may or may not know about. A lot of them don't live in Wisconsin. Down here are most of the web spinning spiders that you're familiar with, like the ones that make cobwebs, the ones that make orb webs, the ones that make sheet webs. They all are in this big group. This is the group that I mostly study. They're called the Araneoids. And then down here are the really derived, the spiders that are very different from their ancestors. They are mostly in this group called it's a dumb name, it's called the RTA clade. And this clade of spiders includes a lot of spiders that have stopped making webs. Their ancestors made webs to catch food. They still make silk, but they stopped making webs. Instead, they jump on their prey or attack their prey, ambush their prey, just like a tiger would. And these include a lot of spiders in Wisconsin that you're familiar with that don't make webs, like crab spiders. They ambush their prey in flowers or on soil. Wolf spiders, they're also sit and wait predators. Jumping spiders that jump on their prey. All of those are in this clade down here. So we know quite a bit about this big group of spiders, or a big group of animals that we call spiders. There are over 50,000 different species on the planet. How many are in Wisconsin? We know about 525, 530. We think there's probably about 600 species of spiders in Wisconsin, but we haven't found them all yet. That is, they're probably not new species, but they live elsewhere, and we haven't found them in Wisconsin yet. This is the 7th largest group of animals on the planet. All the other ones that are bigger, they're mostly insects. So there's what we call the big 4 groups of insects. There's the butterflies and moths. There's the wasps and ants and things, bees. There's the beetles, and then there's the flies. There's a 5th group called bugs. And so those 5 groups of insects have more species than spiders. Then there's a 6th group. It's a group of arachnids called mites, right? Mites and ticks. There's more species of mites than there are spiders too. After that, spiders are number 7. And this is the biggest group of animals that is entirely made of predators. All the other groups have predators in them, but some of them might be vegetarian. Some of them might be scavengers. Some of them might be parasites or parasitoids. But spiders is the biggest group that have nothing but predators. There are other groups that have all predators, or mostly all predators, like sharks, raptors, dragonflies, and damselflies. Those are predaceous groups too, but spiders are bigger than all of those in terms of numbers of species. This is a very ancient lineage. The first spiders in the fossil record are from the Devonian period, which is in the Paleozoic. This is before the dinosaurs. And this is when not all the animals that we're familiar with today exist. There's no flying insects at this time. There was reptiles, but not dinosaurs. There's no mammals, no birds. This is 386 million years ago. So this is way before. This is maybe 50 years before 50 million years before the first dinosaur emerged. So this is a very, very long time ago that we had spiders. So they've been doing what they're doing ever since. There's been animals like tarantulas for 386 million years. Talk a little bit about spider morphology. I think a lot of people know a lot of the basic parts. Like I said, there's 2 body parts. And if you flip the spider over, you can see where the legs come out. But in addition to these 4 pairs of walking legs, there's also this palp in front of them, pedipalp. And then in front of them are the spider's fangs, which are on these leg-like appendages called chelicerae. So they actually are appendages kind of like legs, they're fangs. On top of the spider's body is a carapace, kind of an armored shell, and that's where the eyes are. Most spiders have 6 or 8 eyes, and a few of them have fewer. I'll show you that in a second. And then there's the abdomen at the back. The abdomen has the female reproductive part. This is where the sperm or eggs come out, is at the front of the abdomen, at the bottom, the ventral surface of the abdomen. They also breathe through these gills inside of their abdomen called book lungs. Many spiders also have a little air hole, so they have two different respiratory systems, which is kind of interesting. And then there's their spinnerets at the back. The spinnerets are at the back of the abdomen. When I say spider, a lot of times people just think of like a black widow, but there's a lot of different shapes and sizes of spiders, as you can see. The smallest spiders are less than 1 millimeter long, like this one here. The largest ones, as you know, are like tarantulas, bigger than my hand. And so the difference between the smallest and biggest spiders is about the same as the difference between a mouse and an elephant. It's a huge size range. And then you start looking at all the shapes of different spiders, and they vary as much in their body shape as birds or mammals do. So it's a very diverse group indeed. So we don't want to just think of them as like one thing. Here's a little bit about spider eyes. The sort of ancestral kind of spider eyes are basically 8 eyes in 2 rows. So there's 4 eyes in a front row and 4 eyes in a back row. And so you can name all of the eyes. There's anterior eyes and posterior eyes, A and P. And then the eyes that are in the middle of the body are the medial eyes. The ones on the side of the head are the lateral eyes. And so basically there's 4 types of eyes that spiders have: anterior medial eyes, anterior lateral eyes, posterior middle eyes, and posterior side eyes. So that's kind of the usual. They can be in different patterns, as you can see. Like this one has kind of a hexagon of eyes and then 2 up the front. But really, those are 8 eyes in 2 rows too. So that's kind of the usual way that spiders have. Some spiders lose a pair of eyes. They often lose this front pair of eyes. And so many spiders, including some in Wisconsin, have 6 eyes. And so 6 eyes is reasonably common. So here is a brown recluse over here on the left. And brown recluses have 6 eyes in 3 pairs. If you see an animal with 6 eyes in 3 pairs, it might be a brown recluse. There's only a couple of spiders that are like that. This one also has 6 eyes. This is called a goblin spider, and they live in Wisconsin too. There's very few spiders that have 4 eyes. There's really only one family that I know of that has 4. So this is a spider with 4 eyes. And then there's also one spider family that has 2 eyes. So that's a Caponea. These don't live in Wisconsin, so you won't find a 4 or 2-eyed spider in Wisconsin. By the way, daddy longlegs, they're not spiders, right? They don't make silk. They don't reproduce like the spiders do. They have 2 eyes. So if you see what looks like a spider, but it's got 2 eyes, well, you're probably looking at a daddy longlegs. And then finally, we get to spiders that have no eyes. And mostly these are spiders that live in caves, right? If you live in a cave, you don't need eyes because it's constantly dark, and your eyes can't be maintained by natural selection. So over time, mutations build up and the eyes become useless and then eventually sort of disappear. So this is actually a wolf spider that lives in caves, lava tubes actually, in Hawaii. And the spiders, it's related to spiders that live on the surface, in Hawaii. And this genus of spiders is called the big-eyed wolf spiders. So this species is called the no-eyed, big-eyed wolf spider, which is a great name. It's a little bit of a sad story. This is one of the few spiders that are on the United States Endangered Species Act, because we're taking groundwater out of the Hawaiian Islands, and those lava tubes are getting too dry to support the insects that this spider lives on. So it's becoming fairly rare. So anyway, there's a lot of spiders around the world that are eyeless and that live in caves. And cave-dwelling spiders are often endangered because they only live maybe in one cave system, and that's it. So if something happens to that cave, they can go away. I already talked about how many spiders have 2 different ways to breathe, which is really weird, kind of unique in the animal kingdom. So I'll go on. A little bit about their life cycle. In some ways, spiders have a kind of a normal animal life cycle. That is, there's 2 sexes. There's the males and the females. Males make sperm, females make eggs, and they have fertilization, and then you get an embryo, a zygote, that is a fertilized egg, and it turns into an animal embryo, and then eventually turns into a baby, and then the baby grows up. So in some ways, it's very similar to all other animals that you're familiar with, even including humans. So they are in some ways just like us, but they lay their eggs always in batches. They almost never make just one egg. They make 5 eggs or 50 eggs or maybe even 500 eggs. The record, by the way, is 2,000 or so, maybe 2 to 3,000 eggs in some really large spiders. The smaller spiders tend to make fewer eggs because spiders seem to make their eggs as small as they can so they can have more babies. But there's a limit to how small you can make a spider egg. If it gets too small, it dries up. And so the small ones make fewer eggs, the big ones make more eggs. That's kind of a common thing. The eggs usually hatch into a little baby spider inside the egg sac. An egg sac, by the way, it's wrapped up with silk. It's basically a silken structure, like a bag that holds the eggs and protects them, keeps them from drying out, keeps them from being parasitized, keeps mold from growing on them, stuff like that. So the little spiderlings are inside the egg sac. Many Wisconsin spiders survive the winter as little babies inside of an egg sac. And then they eclose, they chew their way out of the egg sac in the springtime or whatever and turn into babies that are growing, feeding, and then every once in a while they have to shed their skin. And so they go through a certain number of molts. Usually it's about 5 instars to become an adult. So 5 times they have to molt. When they molt their final time, they get their functional genitalia. This is important for the spider, of course, because now they go off and mate and try to, reproduce. But it's very important for spider biologists too, because we tell different species apart because of their genitalia. Their genitalia oftentimes vary a lot more than their bodies do. So a lot of times we can't tell what species a spider is unless it's an adult and we can look at their genitalia under the microscope. So if the spider is an immature, we usually aren't sure what species it is. So that's a difficulty with studying them. Most spiders do not molt after they're an adult, but tarantulas do. The really long-lived, what they're called megalomorphs, they're the tarantulas and their kin, those primitive spiders, they will sometimes live 10, 20 years or more. And so every couple of years, they will shed their skin, basically so they can get a new set of hairs, these sensory hairs. These hairs are almost like little antennae on their bodies, and they wear off and rub off. And so the spider needs to replenish those. Most spiders, including almost all the spiders that live in Wisconsin, they never molt again after they're an adult. They just live for a year, maybe 2 years, and then they die. Courtship is a really important part of spider biology, and it's something that's really interesting that spiders do. They communicate with each other to negotiate who's going to mate with who. And this is really important for spiders because they're predators and they eat things like spiders. Many spiders eat other spiders, right? And so if you're a male spider, you don't just come up to a female and start chatting her up. She might eat you. So you have to have a way of communicating with the female to say, hey, I'm a member of your species and I'm also a sexy male, so let's mate. And so they do all different kinds of courtship. These peacock spiders have a modified flap of skin that is almost like a flag that they wave around. Other spiders just wave their arms. Some spiders tap their arms on the ground and it makes a vibratory signal. Some spiders actually pluck the web of the female and it's almost like playing a musical instrument, like playing a guitar or a harp, and that sends signals to the female too. So this is especially important with spiders too, because not only are they predators, but in most species, the males are smaller than the females. So the females are selected in many cases to be as big as possible, because then they can make more eggs and have more babies. So that's good for their fitness, right? So that's selected for. But the males are selected to be small. Why? Because they need to be the first male to get to a female when she's adult. And so they tend to become adult earlier than the females and at a smaller size. So males are oftentimes selected to get smaller and smaller, females to get bigger and bigger. And so this kind of size difference, like this photo on the right, is very common, where the female might be twice as long as the male and might outweigh the male by 10 times or maybe 50 or 100 times heavier. And so this is a picture of 2 orb weaving spiders, and the photographer said, he was unsuccessful and she killed him shortly after. So that happens. It's a real risk of male spiders. It's hard to be a male spider. So that's an interesting part of their biology. One thing you need to know about spiders, though, in order to understand them and understand their biology, though, is silk, right? So spiders, They all make silk, and they use silk for almost every part of their life cycle. So it's not just to make a web to capture prey. That's a really cool, interesting thing they do. But that's probably not the first thing they did. The first thing they probably did was wrapping their eggs up into egg sacs. So we've talked about that. Here's a picture of several different egg sacs all glued together on a silken line to protect these spiders from parasites and things like that. Then after that, and this is way back 300 million years ago, the first spiders lived in burrows, and they evolved the ability to line their burrows with silk, which keeps them from collapsing. It keeps them dry. It keeps them free from mold. And so they started doing that. And then what started to happen is, these burrow-dwelling spiders, they live in the hole, and then when an insect walks by, they come out of the hole and capture their prey. Well, some of the spiders evolved the ability to put little capture lines out from their burrow, which would act kind of like a fisherman. They've got a line in the water and there's a bobber on the water. And then when the fish takes the hook, the bobber goes down. And so there's a fish, right? That same sort of thing happens with spiders. They have little lines that are going across the ground. And if a cricket walks across the ground, it trips those lines, sends a signal to the spider. There's an animal of a certain size, a certain distance away, and they can go and attack it more efficiently. And so they started putting more and more lines out until basically the lines not only signaled that the prey was there, but also slowed down the prey, tangled the prey up. And so they started to have a sheet coming out of their burrow, and that's the first capture web. And then you can imagine you put the capture web up in the air, and you can have something like a spiral orb web. And so those become really impressive capture devices, these space webs. So that's kind of the evolution of the spider web in a nutshell. Spiders also use their silk as a drag line or a bridge line, and that is basically they glue a line to the ground while they're walking, and then if they fall off a tree, they won't fall all the way down to the ground, right? If you're a tiny spider, it could take you a week to walk back up. And so instead, they just fall a few inches, and it's just like a rock climber with their belaying rope. It catches them if they fall. They're not worried about falling and dying because they hit the ground, because they're so small, gravity doesn't affect them like it does us, right? We'll splat if we fall off the cliff if you're a rock climber. But the spider is not going to die that way. It's going to die because it lives in the tree, and it has to go all the way back up the tree. And so then they started blowing these silk lines in the air, and it could get tangled into a nearby tree, and then it can walk across the silk line to get to another tree. So they can't fly, but spiders can use their silk to get from one place to another. And now a lot of spiders balloon, right? So they use this silk line. They put a little silk line into the breeze, especially if there's warm rising air, or during conditions where there's static electricity in the atmosphere. The silk will actually be attracted to the sky, and it will get sucked up into the air by static electricity. So spiders can use their silk lines to balloon, we call it. That is to passively move in the air. And this has allowed them to move long distances across the oceans to be some of the first colonizers on new islands, for example. And so this is one of the reasons why there's so many species of spiders. They can move around really good over evolutionary time. And then we've seen that the males use their silk to make sperm webs, to keep their sperm clean when they're putting it in their palps. Some spiders, the male spiders, will tie the females up with silk so that she won't attack him. And that's called a nuptial web. Some spiders make a web that's special to keep the babies safe. And so it's a nursery web. So real quick, we'll just walk through what I just told you. Here's some burrow-dwelling megalomorphs, some tarantulas, and some of them have a little lid, but they all live in these burrows. And you can see how having signal lines would be an advantage, and then the more signal lines is better. So they start to make a sheet out of their silk. And then you get a sheet web. This is kind of a halfway. This is the silken web, but it goes out of the ground onto a tree trunk. And these are spiders that actually live in Wisconsin. It's called an atypid or purse web. And this purse, it looks just like the tree trunk. And if a moth lands on the outside of this sock-like purse, the spider is inside the sock, and it pokes its fangs through and attacks the moth that way. So then we get like a funnel web. It's a sheet that comes out of the burrow. And so that is the first kind of space web. And now we have spiders that live in Wisconsin called funnel web spiders that have a really well-developed tube and a big sheet that grasshoppers and other insects get tangled on, and then they run out onto that sheet and attack they can move a lot faster on the sheet than the insects can. They have special claws that don't get tangled up, right? And then if you put that sheet into space, put that funnel into space, it turns into a sheet web. These are sheet webs of sheet web spiders. That's the spider that I specially study. That's the second most diverse type of spider. The most diverse web spinning spider on the planet are sheet web spiders. And then some other families of spiders make kind of three-dimensional webs. Like this is a tangle mesh spider, a dictinid spider. And so these are not only to catch insects, but also to protect the spider from its enemies, like wasps that want to paralyze the spider and carry it to a burrow. Wasps have a hard time getting to the spider because of this tangle of silk. So it's not just for foraging. This web is also for protection. And then finally, we have this orb web, which is a really amazing sort of an engineering feat. They have the tiny amount of silk, and it only takes about an hour to make one of these webs. And if you ever get a chance to watch a spider go through this whole process, I definitely encourage you to do that. This is kind of like if humans were to make a capture web, we would probably design something like this. It's really amazing. And then some spiders have actually taken that orb web and reduced it and made a smaller web that's even easier to make and cheaper to make. Some spiders that live in Wisconsin make just like one pizza pie slice out of the entire pizza pie, right? So they're just making one slice, and they actually hold on to it. This photo, this is the spider up here. That's the spider in close up. There's the spider, and it's basically holding on to the web with its arms. And then when a moth runs into the web, it kind of lets go of the web, and that helps to tangle up the moth in the web. And then you can get finally to as far as you can go with this reduction thing. This spider here, it doesn't really look like a spider, does it? It's folding its legs forward and aft to make it look like a twig. But this spider has a web that is just one strand. So it just has this one strand, and it catches animals that way. And you're like, how could that possibly work? Well, there's two things. One is their silk is marvelously, ridiculously sticky. So they only have one silk line, but it's really expensive silk, and they make it really, really sticky. Second thing they do is they use pheromones. They use chemicals that smell just like a female moth. And so male moths will come right to them to try to find the female, and then they can catch them. So this is a really interesting spider too, this Myogrammapes, because not only does it have a web that's just one string, but it also is one of the few spiders in the world that doesn't have any venom. It's lost its venom, and it just attacks by poking its prey with its fangs. So that's pretty amazing. It's a real minimalist animal. This is a really cool reduced orb web too. These ogre-faced spiders, they live in the tropics. They make kind of an orb web, but they kind of put it in between their front legs, and they hold it, and they use it kind of like a fishing net, right? Like a fisherman would catch a fish in a fishing net. They hang over the surface like a log or something at night. They've got really big eyes, so they can see in the dark really good. And then when an insect walks by, they reach down and grab it. And so that's a really interesting use of a web, more as like a net. And then here are jumping spiders. They've totally gotten rid of their web. Their ancestors made webs to catch prey, but they're so good at running around and jumping that they just use their silk thread as like a drag line for safety, right? So there's their silk right there. They also use their silk for egg sacs and things like that. Fishing spiders that live in Wisconsin, they actually don't use silk at all to catch prey. They use water as a web. That is, they can feel when insects swim by, and they can detect how far away they are, how big they are, and if it's a good food source. And then they'll walk under the water to attack their prey. So they do sometimes catch fish too. This is not a very good photo, but this is basically a minnow that was captured by a fishing spider. So I think these should be the state spider of Wisconsin. They fish, they live by water. They're pretty awesome. A lot of times these are what people call dock spiders or boat spiders, because sometimes they go into your boat. Really cool spiders. These don't live in Wisconsin, these water spiders. They live in Europe and Asia, but really amazing spider that makes a web that's like a diving bell. It's like a bell, and then they carry air on the hairs of their butt. You see it's kind of shiny. They get air from the surface, carry it down, scrape the bubble off, and the bubble goes into the web and fills up the web, and it's like a diving bell. And then they can live inside of that, and they're now safe from fish. Fish can't eat them because they're in an air bubble, but terrestrial predators can't find them either because they're underwater in a pond. And so this is a spider that's catching insects and then storing them in its bubble. So that's really amazing use of web to make an underwater house. So this little cartoon kind of shows the evolution of the capture web, where first there were animals that lived in burrows. Then they started making silk lines on their burrows. They put the silk lines up in the air, and then it turns into a space web. They reduced that space web into the engineering marvel that we call the orb web. And then they can reduce the orb web or change the shape of the orb web into all of these different kinds of webs. So the evolution of webs kind of follows the evolution of spiders. And you can see that we understand a lot better now how spider webs have evolved in those, hundreds of millions of years since spiders have been around. So there's spiders, a lot of animals use silk, but spiders do more with silk than any other animal. So there's up to 7 different kinds of silk in one spider. This is an extreme example, but this spider has 7 different glands in its abdomen, and they each make a different kind of silk that does a different thing for the spider. It makes a different part of the web or whatever. And that's about, I'm starting to run out of time. So that's about all I wanted to say. I could talk a little bit about venom too, and I definitely want to make the case that spiders are not dangerous in Wisconsin. So here's a little bit about, I'll end with a little bit about spider bites. Almost all spiders are venomous. Like I said, there's a few spiders that have lost their venom glands, but almost all of them inject venom into their insect prey to paralyze them and capture them. But most small spiders can't bite humans. So most spiders are just a couple millimeters long, the vast majority of spider species. And if they're smaller than about 1/4 of an inch, about the size of my pinky nail, they can't bite you. And that's without the legs. That's a pretty big spider, right? Its body is going to be that big. And so even the bigger ones are oftentimes very reluctant to bite. So this is my colleague, TJ Jones, and he studies spiders down in Tennessee, and he's got this big, huge golden silk spider, and he's in no danger of getting bitten because those things basically just don't bite people. And of the ones that can and do bite, and definitely some spiders, if you pick them up with your bare hand, you're going to get bit and it's going to hurt. But very few of them are dangerous. So wolf spiders, for example, if you pick up a big wolf spider in Wisconsin, 90% chance it's going to bite you. But it's like a bee sting. So, it's not great. If it hurts, it causes a blister, but it's not going to be a big deal. So there's 2 medically significant spiders that live around here. I'm sure you've all heard of the black widows and brown recluses, but neither one of them is a big problem in Wisconsin. The northern black widow is native to Wisconsin, but it's quite rare because it's just at the northern edge of its range. So it's hard to find them. For the first 20 years that I lived in Wisconsin, I never saw one. Because of global climate change, I think they're becoming more common now. And so we're starting to see them more, but there's no documented cases of widow bites in Wisconsin. This species doesn't live with humans like some others do. Then there's the brown recluse. A lot of people in Wisconsin believe that there are millions of brown recluses that live all over the place in Wisconsin. That is not true. That is false. They do not live outside in Wisconsin at all. No one has ever found a brown recluse outdoors in Wisconsin, to my knowledge, ever. But they have been found inside in Wisconsin because, of course, humans can move them from one place to another. They live in houses. And so if they're living in a box and you move the box to Wisconsin, well, then there's brown recluses in Wisconsin. But it turns out they don't survive and reproduce in Wisconsin. It seems that our central heating in Wisconsin makes it too dry in the winter for them to survive. So there's only special buildings. These are buildings that are old and have a big sub-basement, and they are almost always heated by steam heat. There's a couple of buildings. There's a convent down by Madison where there are brown recluses. Everybody knows about this convent if you're a spider person. And then there's a building close to Lawrence University in Appleton where there are brown recluses too. In my entire career here in Wisconsin, 25 years, I've had people send me dozens and dozens of things they thought were brown recluses. And they were brown recluses exactly 3 times. 3 times they were real brown recluses. All 3 of those brown recluses were from one building, same building. So it's if you live in most buildings in Wisconsin, there just aren't brown recluses there. And so you think down in Oklahoma and Missouri, people have thousands of brown recluses in their house. Literally, they have thousands of brown recluses living in one house. And about 6 people get bitten by brown recluses in Missouri every year. So, if you have thousands and thousands of them, you have a small chance of being bitten. It can be bad if you get bitten, but it's a fairly rare thing. It does not cause your limbs to fall off or anything like that either. So let's talk about that real quick. Most so-called recluse bites are bacterial infections. And so most of the time when people say, brown recluse almost killed this person, it wasn't a brown recluse, it was a bacterial infection. So I'm just going to kind of leave it there and see if you guys have any questions. I think I've talked long enough. I could go on and on, but that's what I really wanted to say. Appreciate your attention. I guess I'll stop sharing my screen, and maybe if anyone has any questions, we can talk. So thanks a lot. Appreciate your patience.